Greetings, everybody. My name is Egon Cholakian. Allow me to begin with a direct and uncompromising statement. Today, I will step outside the confines of conventional scientific discourse and challenge the global scientific establishment. On behalf of the Allatra International Scientific Community, I wish to declare that we are prepared to demonstrate scientifically explicable phenomena and capabilities that have, until now, remained outside the purview of the established academic paradigm. This will be the most consequential experiment in the history of science, one that may compel a fundamental reconsideration of the prevailing conception of the origin of the universe. However, I shall return to this critical matter later in my address. Let me begin with what you are already witnessing, though perhaps you have not yet fully grasped its implications. Increasingly, we see that heavy rains are now accompanied by abnormally large hail. This hail pierces through rooftops, shatters car windows, and injures people. What is notable is not only the rising frequency of such events, but also the growing size of the hailstones themselves. At the same time, reports are mounting of sudden, violent wind gusts, emerging seemingly out of nowhere in regions where such phenomena were previously unheard of. These gusts rip roofs from buildings, topple trees, and destroy billboards and street structures. Parallel to this, tornadoes are beginning to follow abnormal paths and are appearing with increasing frequency in areas where they too had never occurred before. However, what is most alarming is that these newly affected regions lack early warning systems simply because no one anticipated tornadoes in those locations. This has already led to tragic consequences and loss of life. For this reason, tornado shelters are becoming a necessity, even in regions that were never previously classified as tornado-prone. Moreover, we are on the brink of confronting a new reality: the emergence of megatornadoes and megastorms, which will bring levels of destruction unlike anything we have ever seen before. I would also like to draw your esteemed attention to another troubling development: a sharp increase in atmospheric turbulence. As someone who frequently travels by air, I have observed this firsthand. And if you are a regular air traveler, you have likely felt it as well. Turbulence now occurs more frequently, lasts longer, and is markedly more intense. This is a consequence of profound structural changes taking place within the Earth's atmosphere. All of these cataclysmic events, whether hail, hurricanes, wind gusts, precipitation, or tornadoes, are rapidly increasing in both frequency and intensity. According to climate scientists, such events were not expected to reach this scale for at least another 100 to 150 years. Yet they are unfolding now right before our very eyes. Meteorologists have proposed various explanations, but these do not hold up against the reality we are witnessing. Climatologists and weather forecasters are not deliberately misleading the public. Rather, they are interpreting events through the lens of scientific models and concepts familiar to them, models that have become outdated. The changes we now observe no longer conform to those frameworks. Hurricanes no longer adhere to their traditional seasons. Tornadoes appear beyond their historic range, and droughts grip atypical regions. Meanwhile, extreme downpours deliver a month's worth of rain in a matter of hours elsewhere. This is forcing the scientific community to revise its methods, let go of past dogmas, and abandon outdated climate models. This is not merely a matter of adjusting equations. It represents a profound shift in the entire framework for understanding the processes within the Earth atmosphere human system. Fortunately, there are scientists who possess the courage and integrity to admit that the old climate models no longer hold. And it is precisely this honesty, the willingness to acknowledge errors and reevaluate entrenched frameworks, that defines a genuinely scientific approach. This is precisely what distinguishes genuine scientists from pseudo-experts such as Dr. Vinogradov. Only through a proper scientific mindset can we, as humanity, move forward. The rapid escalation in the frequency, intensity, and destructiveness of atmospheric phenomena stems from a single fundamental cause. Before I proceed to its scientific explanation, I ask you to carefully watch the following brief video overview prepared by volunteers of ALLATRA. This video compiles facts and first-hand accounts of what has transpired in the Earth's atmosphere and hydrosphere since 2024 and the consequences that have followed. It is a video every person should see because regardless of where on the planet you live, you must understand that no one is exempt. This is not meant to frighten you. Rather, it is meant to prepare you, to ensure that you are not caught off guard. Too many people live under the illusion of safety, cocooned in the comfort of their homes, simply because disaster has not yet reached their region. But it has already come for millions around the world. It has destroyed their homes, taken their loved ones, and stolen their futures. And if you don't see it with your own eyes, that does not mean it isn't happening. It means only one thing. The front line of climate catastrophe has not yet reached you. But tragically, it is only a matter of time.
Tropical cyclones. According to expert estimates, every tropical hurricane in 2024 was more powerful than those from 100 years ago. For instance, Super Typhoon Yagi that hit China during the autumn became the strongest typhoon in history. It had so much energy that it remained a super typhoon for nearly 64 hours without weakening and had an unusually large outer radius. Another unprecedented feature of tropical cyclones in 2024 and 2025 is the explosive strengthening of these events known as rapid intensification. In 2024, tropical cyclone seasons unfolded quite differently than before. In the Atlantic, the first and last months of the season were abnormally active, while the peak of the season was unusually calm. Hurricane Beryl that formed in June became the only Category 4 hurricane in history in this ocean basin and also the earliest Category 5 hurricane. The tropical cyclone season in the southern hemisphere began almost a month earlier than the official start date of November 1st and was significantly more active. By the end of March, there were 27 named storms, and their total energy exceeded the norm by 28%. In 2024, tropical cyclones displayed entirely strange characteristics. Experts recorded a tropical storm with a record small wind field and a typhoon with very low land movement speed, which resulted in an enormous amount of precipitation. There was even a zombie hurricane that almost dissipated and then strengthened again. In 2024 and 2025, tropical cyclones made landfall unusually often in areas traditionally not prone to such extreme events. In March 2025, Cyclone Alfred became an exceptionally rare event for Australia. It was the first tropical cyclone since 1974 to approach the east coast near densely populated Brisbane. On November 12, 2024, a highly rare event occurred over the northwestern Pacific Ocean. 4 typhoons simultaneously. And in February 2025, a similar anomaly happened in the southern hemisphere. But this time, 6 tropical cyclones raged simultaneously in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Storms. One of the most vivid illustrations of atmospheric instability has been the endless series of storms in the U.S. in 2025. After 8 of the most powerful winter storms came spring thunderstorm outbreaks with a record number of tornadoes. Much like the rapid intensification of hurricanes, storm bombogenesis, explosive strengthening of storms, is progressing along with ocean warming. Meteorologists describe the storm that struck the U.S. and Canada at the end of November 2024 as one of the most intense ever recorded in the region. It exceeded the threshold for bomb cyclone classification by 2 times. The situation was worsened by the impact of an atmospheric river, that is, a powerful narrow stream of water vapor in the sky that can bring huge downpours to the Earth, comparable to the flows of large rivers. Such stacking of 2 phenomena is being observed more and more frequently, amplifying destructive effects. In February 2025 in Brazil's Pernambuco state, the interaction between 2 meteorological systems resulted in a powerful storm that caused record rainfall, flooding, and numerous landslides. Changes in atmospheric circulation caused by an overheated ocean are creating conditions for the formation of pathological winds. They are sudden, gusty, and extremely powerful, comparable to hurricane-force winds. Here are just a few examples from recent months. Storm Eowyn, which struck Ireland in January 2025, became the most costly wind-related natural disaster in the country's history. In County Galway, record speeds of gusts and sustained wind were recorded over the entire time of digital observations in Ireland. According to NOAA, March 2025 was the windiest on record in many U.S. cities and in the country as a whole. In April, during a powerful convective storm, almost 500 weather stations across China broke the record for maximum April wind speed. The destruction was particularly severe in Hebei and Henan provinces. Wind speeds there reached force 15, exceeding 150 feet per second, comparable to a Category 2 tropical hurricane. People weighing less than 110 pounds were advised not to go outside as they could be blown away by the wind. Temperature anomalies. In 2024, numerous heat waves were observed, frequently breaking national or local temperature records. They affected southeastern Europe, North and South Africa, the Sahel, the Middle East, parts of the Americas, Central, Southern and Eastern Asia, and Australia. In early March 2025, Europe experienced an anomalous heat wave with temperatures more typical for May. In some countries, deviations from the norm exceeded 12 degrees Celsius. In Latvia, early March was the warmest on record. In Belarus, all 48 weather stations recorded values above absolute early March maxima. Ukraine was also in the center of the heat wave. In the city of Ivano-Frankivsk, the temperature nearly reached the maximum values of July and August, the hottest months of the year. It's important to note that due to disruptions in atmospheric circulation, heat waves now remain stationary for extended periods, leading to droughts, wildfires, crop failures, and most importantly, human casualties. But what humanity was completely unprepared for is the sharp temperature fluctuations, chaotic seasonal shifts, and huge deviations from climate norms. This anomaly escalated catastrophically in 2025. Although this trend is observed globally, let us illustrate it with the example of Russia, where the rising Siberian magma plume is provoking unimaginable temperature anomalies. In January 2025, instead of traditional epiphany frosts, Russia experienced a high number of thaws, and air temperatures resembled mid-March. In Yakutsk, one of the coldest cities on Earth, record warmth came in January. On some days, air temperature exceeded the climate norm by more than 24 degrees Celsius. In some places like Kaliningrad region, plants began vegetating and insects awakened in the heart of winter due to unseasonal warmth. In February, on the Kola Peninsula beyond the Arctic Circle, temperatures at times remained above freezing even at night, reaching +5 degrees Celsius during the day, while the south of the country faced the strongest cold in recorded history, along with heavy snowfalls. In March, in Siberian cities where the average maximum temperature is around 1 degree Celsius, the air warmed to an unimaginable +24 degrees Celsius. This was followed by a sharp cold snap and a powerful storm with wind gusts up to 115 feet per second. The alternation between winter and summer continued in April and May across many regions of the country. In southern Russia, after 20-degree heat, frost and snowstorms returned. In the Republic of Adygea, snowdrifts reached 14 inches in height, an extraordinary event for this region. In Kazan, an April night was warmer than a typical summer night. Experts struggle to describe what is happening with the country's climate. The scientific director of the Hydrometeorological Center, Roman Vilfand, said, "It's a unique, extremely unique April because the weather was swinging from one extreme to another. Yet, this kind of temperature swings will only intensify. Plants are unprepared for such fluctuations. Frosts occurring during vulnerable periods of vegetation can destroy entire harvests. Farmers in many countries are already reporting 100% crop losses. Moreover, no living organism is adapted to such extreme temperature anomalies." Tornadoes. In the United States, 2024 was a very active year and the second highest on record in terms of tornado count. And in 2025, 3 deadly tornado outbreaks occurred within just 3 weeks. By early May, over 650 tornado reports had been registered, 225 of them in just 12 days, from March 27th to April 7th. Europe also set a record for total tornadoes on land and water. 1,077 events in a year. That's 11 times more than what was recorded before the year 2000. Due to rising humidity and global temperatures, conditions for convective storms, the main producers of tornadoes, are now forming even in traditionally cold months of the year. For example, an IF3 category tornado in Moscow region in late September was exceptional, as it combined several anomalies. It occurred in autumn in temperate latitudes and was very powerful. In Italy, on January 17th, the province of Syracuse was struck by a rare event for that time of year. Several tornadoes formed at the same time. In Rabigh, Saudi Arabia, on January 6, 2025, an unprecedented event took place. A massive waterspout made landfall, creating high waves. This alarmed climatologists and locals because previously, waterspouts had only been observed in this region in open sea. On April 26th, in Kyiv region, northern Ukraine, a tornado was recorded that clearly stood out as an anomaly for the region. Abnormal precipitation, floods, and landslides. This graph shows the trend of abnormal precipitation in Europe over a 5-year period since 1990. The growth is exponential. Events reached unprecedented levels precisely in 2024 and early 2025. In just 1 year and 4 months, from January last year to April this year, 11,572 cases of abnormal precipitation were registered in European countries. That's nearly 2.5 times more than the total from the entire 20-year period starting in 1990. A few years ago, abnormal precipitation was already considered extreme if it equaled a monthly norm. But in 2024, the intensity suddenly jumped. Now, within a few days, sometimes hours, entire annual rainfall amounts are recorded. Such negative records have been noted in all continents, including countries like Sudan, Morocco, UAE, Iran, China, Australia, Italy, Spain, and many others. Naturally, such extreme precipitation causes sudden, destructive, and often deadly flooding. In 2025, this trend continued. At the end of March, in the state of Texas, USA, more than an annual norm of rain fell within less than 2 days. In the Russian city of Makhachkala, April rains were the heaviest in at least the last 114 years. The list can go on for hundreds of countries, and this trend applies not only to rain but also to snow. In February 2025, in Sochi, Russia, more than 5 annual snow norms fell in just a few days. At the same time, residents of Turkey experienced the most powerful snowfall in the past 50 years. While Georgia was hit by a true snow apocalypse, causing a transportation collapse and even human casualties. In Hokkaido Prefecture, Japan, 47 inches of snow fell within 12 hours, which has become a national record. Another important yet extremely dangerous trend is that precipitation is now falling in previously arid regions. Dry soil cannot absorb such vast amounts of water, resulting in destructive floods. In the Sahara Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, unusually heavy rains occurred in September 2024, making it the wettest year in the region's recorded history. In some areas, 5 to 10 annual norms of rain fell. In January 2025, for the first time in half a century, heavy snow fell in Morocco. In some places, snowdrifts reached 1.6 feet. For an African country, this is extremely atypical. Locals face difficult conditions, snow-blocked roads, and isolated settlements. With the increase in rainfall and flooding, the number of landslides is also inevitably rising. In 2024, there was an anomalously high activity of these geological processes. A total of 766 deadly landslides were recorded, which claimed 4,933 lives. This is the highest annual number of landslides ever recorded. Droughts. Alongside flooding, droughts are also intensifying. In 2024, the most severe drought in a century affected southern Africa. Meanwhile, a devastating drought in Colombia caused the Amazon River to drop by 90%. March of this year was one of the driest in Germany since measurements began in 1881. Between early February and mid-April 2025, the lowest precipitation level over 94 years has been recorded. Atmospheric pressure anomalies. In February 2025, an anticyclone of incredible size formed over Siberia, stretching more than 5,000 miles, from the British Isles to the Russian Far East. It brought numerous atmospheric pressure records. In particular, on February 8th in St. Petersburg, pressure exceeded 1,055 hectopascals, which is the highest February value in the city's history. This weather anomaly affected not only weather-sensitive individuals, but even equipment. In some cars, the check engine light was triggered. At Pulkovo Airport, all Sukhoi Superjet 100 flights were canceled because the aircraft's critical devices are not designed to operate under pressures above 1,050 hectopascals. It was also anomalous that during the anticyclone, when, as everyone knows, it is supposed to be frosty and clear in winter, the sky over Moscow region was covered with dense clouds, and it was even snowing. This deviation from the norm puzzled the experts. Such anomalies and cataclysms will only continue to intensify with every passing month.
We're literally in a fucking tornado, dude.
So, what is the cause behind the intensifying phenomena in the atmosphere and hydrosphere? The first and most fundamental cause of the ongoing natural anomalies across all layers of the Earth is an astronomical cycle, one that the entire solar system enters every 12,000 years. Imagine the Earth as a massive sphere with another extremely hot sphere at its center, its core. Every 12,000 years, this intercore receives an external cosmic influence in the form of additional energy. You can think of it like someone increasing the voltage on an electric heater. This heating effect applies not only to our planet, Earth, but also to other celestial bodies within the solar system, even the Sun itself. What confirms the existence of this external cosmic influence is the widespread increased internal activity and the rising number of anomalies across the various layers of all solar system bodies that possess cores. As for the physical nature of this external influence, it remains unknown, for humanity has yet to detect the source directly. And yet, the effects are undeniable. Planets once considered dead now show signs of geodynamic activity. Meanwhile, all layers of the Earth are undergoing significant changes. Everything points to the arrival of excess external energy, which in turn causes internal planetary heating and triggers tectonic, volcanic, and electromagnetic phenomena. This external energy causes the Earth's core to become even hotter. Figuratively speaking, it's akin to turning up the heat on a stove beneath a pot of milk covered with a glass lid. In much the same way, the movement of molten material within the Earth intensifies, and magma begins to rise more actively towards the surface. Just as the milk in the pot starts to swell upward toward the lid, magma ascends from the depths of the mantle toward the crust, pressing upward and seeking to break through, just as the milk attempts to spill out from under the lid. At first, as the milk nears the lid, it builds pressure and causes the lid to rattle. Likewise, magma, as it rises closer to the crust, generates pressure that results in tectonic vibrations, which manifest as an increase in the frequency of earthquakes. As the milk continues to rise, it begins to lift the lid slightly, escaping in thin streams of steam and droplets. This can be likened to the activation of individual volcanoes when we observe plumes of steam and localized magma outflows. From a physics standpoint, the processes occurring in a pot of heated milk are remarkably similar to those now unfolding within our planet. Internal heat sets in motion a chain reaction of consequences. This in turn leads to a rise in the frequency and magnitude of earthquakes, along with surges in volcanic activity. More heat escapes from deep within the Earth, warming the oceans and increasing the heat and humidity of the atmosphere. Studies of ancient rock and ice layers, which serve as a kind of geological archive, indicate that such periods of intensified geodynamic activity have occurred regularly, approximately every 12,000 years. And every 24,000 years, these catastrophes have become even more powerful. The reason is that during each 24,000-year cycle, an external cosmic influence delivers several times more energy to the Earth's core. As a result, the mantle melts more intensely, triggering stronger earthquakes, more violent volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, floods, and hurricanes. According to geological data, the last such catastrophic period occurred roughly 24,000 years ago. This means we have now entered a phase marked by more destructive consequences than those that occurred in the 12,000-year cycle. It is this deeper cyclical cause that underlies the increasing number and severity of today's cataclysms, upon which all other contributing factors, which I will address shortly, are now being superimposed upon. The next factor, one that amplifies the already formidable 24,000-year cycle, is the breakdown of a critical mechanism in the Earth's cooling system, the ocean's thermoregulatory function. This failure was triggered not merely by plastic pollution, but by the degradation of plastic into micro and nanoplastics. It is nanoplastics in particular that constitutes the anthropogenic factor diminishing the thermal conductivity of ocean water. As a result, the heat that was once efficiently dissipated from the lithospheric plates by cold ocean currents is no longer being removed as effectively. Imagine a car engine's cooling system suddenly contaminated with a large quantity of sand. The engine would begin to overheat, as the system could no longer dissipate heat properly. The same principle applies here. Nanoplastic disrupts the ocean's capacity to cool the Earth's interior, which means that excess heat continues to accumulate within the planet. Thus, the heat rising from the molten core is unable to escape, intensifying the planet's internal overheating. In this way, human activity, specifically ocean pollution with nanoplastics, exacerbates the situation and further fuels the catastrophes already unfolding and escalating under the extreme 24,000-year cycle. Ocean warming in and of itself is a hazardous phenomenon. As evaporation increases, so too does the moisture content of the atmosphere. This in turn leads to uneven distribution of precipitation across the entire planet. You may have already noticed that some regions are experiencing intensified droughts, while others are seeing extreme rainfall events, with precipitation levels far exceeding the local norms. There has been a noticeable rise in the number of tornadoes, as well as an increase in the intensity and frequency of storms and hurricanes. This trend will continue to escalate until hurricanes begin transitioning into the stage of mega hurricanes. Two additional factors further aggravate the situation. The first is the Siberian magma plume. In my previous addresses, I have explained this phenomenon on several occasions. However, since many may be hearing about it for the first time today, I will briefly summarize. Most people are familiar with the concept of a volcano, a vent or fissure in the Earth's crust through which magma from the upper mantle reaches the surface. Volcanoes are typically localized and are associated with the boundaries of tectonic plates. A magma plume is a fundamentally different phenomenon. It is a colossal column of superheated material rising from the deep layers of the mantle, possibly from the very boundary between the mantle and the core. Unlike volcanoes, a plume is incomparably larger. The Siberian magma plume has a diameter of 2,500 to 3,000 kilometers. That is to say, 1,550 to say 1,860 miles, which is comparable in scale to the entire continent of Australia. It originates far deeper than any volcano, hundreds, even thousands of kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. While a volcanic eruption is a localized event, plume activity has the potential to trigger large-scale geological transformations and global catastrophes. To illustrate, if a volcano can be likened to a single fountain in a park, then a plume is the entire municipal water system that feeds dozens of such fountains. Or, to use another analogy, if a volcano's energy output is comparable to a backyard barbecue where you grill steaks on the weekend, A plume would be the equivalent of a nuclear explosion of staggering magnitude. Even compared to the well-known Yellowstone supervolcano, which is itself regarded as a serious threat, the Siberian magma plume presents a danger of an entirely different magnitude. It has the potential to release a volume of molten material up to 1,000 times greater than the most extreme possible eruption of Yellowstone. Approximately 250 million years ago, the activity of the Siberian plume triggered a series of catastrophic eruptions known as the Siberian traps. This event caused the Great Permian extinction, during which more than 90% of all species on Earth vanished. It remains the most severe extinction event in the planet's history. Today, there are already observable signs of reactions in what is considered the most dangerous plume on Earth. The area beneath Siberia affected by magma flows is now comparable in size to Australia. The plume is exerting pressure on the Earth's crust, causing it to rise. Elevated seismic activity is being recorded along the perimeter of this zone. There is a scientifically grounded risk that magma could soon breach the surface. Remember the analogy of a pot of milk on the stove. When the milk surges upward with enough force, it either lifts the lid or blows it off entirely, causing the contents to spill out in large volume onto the burner. That moment is now comparable to the potential breach of the Siberian magma plume. It is crucial to understand that the danger posed by the Siberian magma plume extends far beyond Russia's borders. In the event of a sudden, full-scale eruption, 2/3 of humanity would perish instantly. If this catastrophic scenario unfolds, Russia would be annihilated almost immediately, and the devastating consequences would rapidly cascade across the entire globe. Given the already overheated state of the world's oceans and the critical processes unfolding within them, even isolated groups of survivors would face extreme difficulty in sustaining life for more than a few years. Considering the duration of subsequent catastrophic events, including a prolonged hypervolcanic winter and the resulting transformation in Earth's atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere, we can state with confidence that the extinction of humanity would be inevitable. More detailed data on the current situation, potential consequences, and proposed solutions can be found in the scientific report on the threat of a magma plume eruption in Siberia and strategies for addressing the issue, prepared by a team of scientists, specialists, and volunteers of the international movement ALLATRA. Eruptions of the Siberian plume last occurred several 100 million years ago. And it is we, this generation, who have been fortunate in a way unlike any before us. It is during our lifetime that this dormant geological force, a slow-motion magmatic bomb lying in wait for 250 million years, has begun to reactivate. Unlike our ancestors, we have the rare opportunity to witness this global planetary event firsthand. Undeniably, it is a phenomenon of extraordinary rarity, but one we would be far better off avoiding. The reactivation of the Siberian plume began in 1998, after a sudden shift in the Earth's core toward the Taimyr Peninsula in the Siberian Arctic. This abrupt displacement initiated a rapid upward movement of magma in that direction. What has been the effect of this on the entire planet? Imagine this. Within our planet, already undergoing heating and melting as part of the 24,000-year cycle, while its oceanic cooling system is no longer functioning properly, an area the size of the continent begins to warm near the surface several times faster than the rest of the globe. what can be expected? The pressure and heat in this zone will create an increasingly explosive scenario. Moreover, the portion of the ocean that overlaps with the Siberian magma plume's heating zone, specifically the Arctic seas of the Siberian shelf, will begin to accumulate vast amounts of energy in the form of heat. And research confirms this trend. The Siberian Arctic is now warming nearly 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, an acceleration far greater than what was previously accounted for in climate models. The intense warming of the Arctic seas is occurring precisely in the region of the Taimyr Peninsula, where the epicenter of the Siberian plume's ascent is located. This warming is driven by the fact that the oceanic crust in this area is thinner and conducts heat more effectively, while seawater has a higher heat capacity than the atmosphere. As a result, ocean water absorbs and retains heat from the rising magma plume far more effectively, even though the plume itself is ascending beneath the continental crust and at a relative distance from the shoreline. Now you can understand, during this 24,000-year cycle of intensified cataclysms, at a time when the ocean has lost its thermal conductivity due to contamination with micro and nanoplastics, the Siberian magma plume has become active. Because of this, the ocean, already being heated from the Earth's molten interior, is now receiving additional heat from the warming Arctic seas. This amplifies the heating of the entire geodynamic system. The mantle, unable to cool, continues to melt more rapidly. This, in turn, increases the upward flow of superheated magma beneath the tectonic plate, exponentially intensifying pressure on this section of the crust. The situation is further aggravated by catastrophic gas release, resulting from complex physical-chemical reactions between the incandescent magma and the overlying plate. You now see 3 key components in the complex causes behind the intensification of cataclysms: the 24,000-year cycle of extreme disasters, the ocean, polluted with micro and nanoplastics and thus retaining heat, and the activation of the Siberian magma plume. The final component that must be addressed is the absence of operational experimental equipment designed to mitigate such disasters, something I have spoken about in several of my previous addresses. Scientists of the international scientific community, ALLATRA, developed a unique piece of protective experimental equipment that functioned as a protective mechanism over the vast territory affected by the rising Siberian magma plume. And well beyond it, this equipment operated for 10 years, from 2013 to 2023. According to publicly available statistical data, that decade was marked by a paradoxically low incidence of natural disasters across Russia, as well as in parts of Eastern Europe, Kazakhstan, and northern China. Look at the chart on the screen. I have shown it to you on several of my previous addresses. This graph clearly illustrates the contrast between Russia's vast territory and the relatively low number of natural disasters compared to other countries during the period from 2013 to 2023. The bars represent the number of natural disasters during the specified period, while the figures next to the flags indicate the land area of each country. As can be seen from the chart, countries with a land area roughly equivalent to Russia experience a significantly higher level of natural disasters. Even Italy, with a significantly smaller area, surpassed Russia in the number of cataclysms during the time frame. For many scientists, this phenomenon represented an unexplained paradox. According to the laws of physics, the number of natural disasters in Russia should have risen sharply, especially given that air temperatures across the country were increasing 2.5 to 3 times faster than the global average, a direct consequence of the Siberian magma plume's activity. And yet, contrary to all forecasts, no substantial rise in cataclysms was observed. This was directly linked to the operation of the experimental equipment. This protective equipment functioned on the principle of controlled disruption of certain regular physical linkages, specifically the electromagnetic interactions between the Earth's interior and the atmosphere. Through this controlled intervention, it became possible to temporarily disrupt the chain of energy transfer from intensifying processes in the Earth's interior to the upper layers of the atmosphere. It was precisely due to this effect that within the operational zone of the equipment, the impact of intensified subterranean processes did not manifest as catastrophic atmospheric phenomena, such as hurricanes, tornadoes, anomalous downpours, or extreme temperature fluctuations. This was also accompanied by a measurable reduction in seismic activity. For those paying close attention, this also makes clear that all surface-level climate phenomena are the result of changes occurring deep within our planet. This equipment did more than stabilize a local area. It maintained equilibrium at a global level, preventing a cascading reaction of climate and tectonic events on the planet. According to all known geophysical laws, a series of devastating disasters should have occurred precisely in this focal region of the Siberian plume. But they did not, because the key electromagnetic linkages between the Earth's interior and the atmosphere had been temporarily severed, preventing the full-scale propagation of energy. It is essential to understand that this equipment effectively granted humanity time. Without its operation, many regions might no longer exist in any recognizable form. I want you to grasp the full value of what this equipment accomplished. Although it was situated directly in the epicentral zone, right above the plume, its influence extended far beyond that region. It restrained not only localized, but also global climatic and geodynamic processes, exerting a stabilizing effect on the entire planet. Yes, during its operational period, other parts of the world continued to experience cataclysms more frequently than Russia. That is a fact. However, it is important to understand that even this level of frequency and severity was substantially lower than what would have occurred had the equipment not been active. By all scientific calculations and indicators, if this intervention had not been initiated 10 years ago, we would have begun witnessing colossal climate and geodynamic catastrophes 5 years ago. In fact, a portion of those same catastrophes began to emerge just 2 years ago, after the system was deactivated. Today, we've all seen what happens in terms of storms, hurricane activity, and atmospheric anomalies. In the climate sphere, we are already witnessing anomalous weather events and mounting damage from hurricanes, storms, torrential rains, and extreme temperatures. Yet even with all of this, the scale of these events remains significantly lower than it could have been had the containment system not been active for many years. Without it, the climate-related consequences would have been far more devastating. We are currently living through a stage that is only gaining momentum, precisely because the escalation was temporarily held back in time. Now, just imagine what the next 5 years will bring without this containment mechanism in operation. At present, the average global seismic activity hovers around magnitude 5 and is only just beginning to rise toward magnitude 6 systematically. Had this protective mechanism not been operating during the preceding period, the planet would already be in a drastically different state, characterized by sustained seismic activity at magnitude 7, frequent earthquakes reaching magnitude 8, and in certain zones, destructive events registering at magnitude 9. This would have meant catastrophic levels of destruction, massive loss of life, and the total destabilization of entire regions. It was the operation of this equipment that provided temporary stabilization, allowing us to gain precious time that is now diminishing with each passing day. The operation of this equipment can be likened to a dam on a mountain river. It restrains a powerful current, and by the time the water reaches the plains, it has lost its destructive force, becoming a controlled and gentle flow. That is precisely the role this equipment played. It suppressed the transfer of energy between the Earth's interior and the atmosphere. Without it, the scale of destruction would have been exponentially greater. It can be stated with absolute certainty that a vast portion of the planet's population would no longer be alive at this point. We would already be immersed in the phase of global climate and geophysical chaos that scientists now forecast to emerge over the next 5 to 10 years. But thanks to the timely deployment of the system, we are only now approaching the threshold, whereas we could have already been living within it. It is important to understand that destructive processes have not been halted. They have only been delayed because the equipment, at its core, served as a defensive screen. To illustrate this more clearly, let us return once again to the analogy of a pot of milk on a hot stove. If you place a layer of thermal insulation between the burner and the pot, it will slow the transfer of heat, causing the boiling process to unfold far more gradually. But if you remove that protective barrier, the full energy of the burner will act directly on the pot, triggering rapid and uncontrollable boiling. The same principle applies here. The equipment could not eliminate all risk of natural disasters, but it made the development of catastrophic events more restrained, buying precious time for humanity. The effectiveness of this protective screen is supported by statistical data from publicly available sources, which I have referenced in my previous addresses. The evidence of the equipment's impact is irrefutable. In August 2023, following the designation of the Alatra movement as undesirable in Russia, the experimental protective equipment was dismantled and removed from the country. And on September 3rd, we issued a warning. This decision was one of the gravest mistakes humanity could make, and it would lead to severe consequences, not only for Russia, but for the entire world. We then stated that the first adverse effects would begin to emerge within 3 to 4 months, and that the full scope of consequences would become apparent within 6 to 9 months after the equipment's removal. The consequences did not take long to appear. From August 10th through November 2023, there was an unprecedented surge in both the number and intensity of climate-related disasters in Russia and Eastern Europe. The data reveals a cascading pattern of calamities, each disaster following the next with increasing force, a progression that had never before been observed. As I have already stated in my previous addresses, the economic consequences of the turning off of the equipment have been catastrophic. For example, 6 significant weather anomalies that occurred after the system was shut down caused Russia more damage than the country suffered from natural disasters in any single year since 2012. And I would like to emphasize that all losses incurred by Russia and by the rest of the world following the deactivation of this experimental equipment should be legally claimed from the extremist organization Raciers and its leader, Alexander Dworkin. that would be just. It was precisely due to their aggressive campaign that Alatra was dehumanized and ultimately designated as an undesirable organization in Russia. As a result, we were forced to shut down the experimental system. This was done because continuing its operation within Russian territory would have been deemed an illegal act by a prohibited organization. The forced shutdown of the equipment has already resulted not only in multi-billion-dollar losses around the world, but in the loss of thousands of lives, lives that could have been spared, if not for this international extremist group of saboteurs led by Dvorkin. I say this because on May 19th, Vladimir Putin signed a decree on state monitoring of the harm inflicted on Russia by foreign entities and individuals acting in their interest. In my view, the Raciers organization caused Russia the most tremendous damage. Therefore, I believe that responsibility for this harm must be personally assigned to Dvorkin as the head of Raciers. The provisions of this decree should be implemented and the actual perpetrators held accountable, if that is at all possible through the appropriate legal channels. As for the return of the dismantled experimental equipment to the Siberian territory, as of today, doing so would no longer yield the same protective effect. Over the past 3 years, the activity of the plume has increased significantly, and the former level of mitigation can no longer be restored. However, this problem has a very simple and logical solution, one I will tirelessly reiterate: controlled, planned degassing. This involves relieving pressure in the plume's magma system by diverting excess gases and lava through the simultaneous drilling of hundreds of wells. Firstly, this would prevent the potential scenario of a Siberian plume eruption, which could trigger a planetary-scale catastrophe. Secondly, it would stabilize the global climate situation by significantly reducing the planet's overall heat accumulation and the internal pressure of magma on the Earth's crust. This is the most sound and logical solution available to us today. However, for certain reasons, this solution is not being implemented. What are these reasons? As I've already mentioned, the information about the threat of the Siberian plume and ways to neutralize it is not a recent revelation. We have been trying to communicate this to the global public and responsible officials for over a decade. Since Alatra scientists, through a private research initiative, definitively identified, confirmed, and documented the following correlation: the accumulation of thermal energy in the Earth's core is directly linked to the increasing activity of the Siberian magma plume. What follows is simple logic. There is a problem. The problem has a clearly established cause, and that cause has a reasonable and technically feasible solution: initiating a controlled degassing process. If the world adhered to basic principles of logic, this problem would have been urgently addressed long ago. Here lies the paradox. The longer I observe the processes in the modern world, the clearer it becomes that logic, unfortunately, is a rare commodity. It's not readily available to everyone. Ironically, those burdened with power, preoccupied with personal gain, and seemingly harboring a deep intolerance for common sense are often the most lacking. In such circles, the logic of science and the survival of the species seem irrelevant. What prevails instead is the distorted logic of influence and financial flows. Everything else is merely background noise to them. And so, evidently guided by this very same irrational, cruel, and soulless logic, Certain power circles in Russia issued direct orders. Do not discuss the problem of the Siberian plume. Do not analyze open data. Do not engage in scientific debate, but instead, silence those who dare to voice what can no longer be concealed. Destroy them, reputationally, legally, and even physically. It's a scheme as old as time. Their obedient, trained dogs are unleashed, ready to bark in whatever direction their master commands. In this case, that trained pack is raciers, or more precisely, Dvorkin's totalitarian network. The very same extremist group of killers masquerading as cult specialists and experts, but in reality engaged in terrorism, and not just of the informational kind. They were the ones who received the order to crush those who raised the issue of Siberian plume in public, namely the Allatra movement, its scientific community, and its participants. And let me speak frankly, the topic of Dvorkin's pack and Dvorkin himself as an individual mired in psychological disorders and moral depravity is genuinely repugnant to me. I would prefer not to dwell on it again. But I must clarify a few things once more because I want you to understand the most critical point. What Dvorkin and his accomplices are doing constitutes a true crime against humanity. They are obstructing the path to truth, to real scientific knowledge, knowledge that without exaggeration could save the world today. Because of their actions, we are now standing at a critically dangerous point, when the roof over your head could collapse at any moment due to a sudden magnitude 7 earthquake, an extraordinarily powerful hurricane, or an unprecedented hailstorm. Consider the following carefully. Neither Dvorkin nor his agents have ever analyzed the actual situation or examined any real data concerning their targets. Not a single one of them has ever thought to look into what Allatra is actually saying, what its participants are doing, or what vital research they are actually conducting. Dvorkin's agents, like Dvorkin himself, have never opened Allatra's reports, never studied the essence of its engineering solutions, and never explored the principles of plume degassing. They simply do not care about humanity's fate. They have no need for it. They were given the command to attack, and they obediently carried it out with their trademark sadistic cruelty. They are obsessively fixated on executing that order, to smear honest and upstanding Allatra participants with lies and dehumanizing labels. People who for many years have worked day after day, not for money, not for status, but out of a sincere internal calling to solve a real global threat. And today, because of the barbaric actions of Dvorkin's extremist network, both in Russia and in Ukraine, Allatra volunteers, these conscientious individuals, including researchers, engineers, scientists, educators, and professionals from various fields, upstanding citizens of their respective countries, are subjected to brutal repression and pressure. Some of them in Russia are unjustly imprisoned in horrific conditions and subjected to torture and inhumane treatment. Not for committing crimes, not for causing harm to anyone, but for remaining faithful to honesty and moral duty in a time of indifference, cynicism, and looming global danger, for doing everything in their power to resolve the monstrous geodynamic crisis now threatening the future of all humanity, and for striving to identify and implement the solution essential to the survival of our civilization and our planet. Please, I urge you, just consider for a moment how profoundly unjust this is. The representatives of Alatra have, over many years of dedicated work, made immeasurable contributions to humanity. Among their achievements is the development of experimental equipment that helped mitigate climate conditions across Eurasia and around the globe for more than a decade. They are also prepared to offer even more: solutions in the fields of climate science, geodynamics, and new physics. Yet it is precisely these competent and critically important efforts that are now being targeted for destruction by Dworkin's totalitarian network, a network that throughout its existence has brought about countless deaths. Let's ask the question directly. What, in essence, has Dworkin's organization given to the world over its 3 decades of activity? A wave of unjust persecution, millions of ruined lives, mountains of pseudo-expert opinions written from the same playbook and commissioned on demand, leading to tens of thousands of innocent people being dragged through the legal system simply for holding the wrong faith, the wrong worldview, or the wrong approach to life. Dworkin's legacy is one of broken families and psychologically scarred individuals. People crucified in the media and destroyed in court by Dworkin's loyal enforcers. Based on their denunciations, children were taken from parents without cause, subjected to violence, their minds shattered, and all of it under the banner of protecting citizens from destructive cults. But if you look closely at Dworkin's actual methods, especially if you've ever studied the history of Nazism, you'll find much that feels painfully familiar. First, they manufacture the image of an enemy. Then they produce a false expert report. And finally, they deliver a real sentence, all of it wrapped in the sticky, sweet packaging of a supposed fight against evil. How many innocent people have died in prison because of Dworkin's work? Died in agony, in despair, separated from loved ones, for nothing. How many have lost their children, their families, or their closest ones? And that's not even mentioning what Dworkin's totalitarian pact has turned the state itself into. A regime that now functions through their expertise and the laws passed under their pressure as yet another concentration camp. Through their cruel and manipulative techniques, they pit entire nations against each other. This is the true legacy of Dworkin's 30-year campaign and the network of his agents: division, suffering, and death. That is the only thing this deceitful expert has given to his country and its people. Coffins for some, broken lives for others, and for everyone else, an unending stream of lies, manipulation, and distorted reality. This is what Dworkin and the followers of his own totalitarian cult have done for you over the past 30 years. And today, as a direct result of their actions, your life, your children's lives, and the very survival of humanity are now at risk. And the cause of it all, one unwell man who built a vast repressive machine from his followers. Now, contrary-wise, let's take a moment to consider what Alatra has given to the world, and to you personally, whoever you may be, and to your children, if you have children, through its public and private work over the years. Today it is finally possible to speak openly about this, as much of what was once confidential has now come to light. Alatra scientists have conducted and continue to conduct extensive multidisciplinary research in the fields of climate, geodynamics, and geophysics. These studies form the basis for concrete actions aimed at preserving human life and developing real, practical solutions to the threats hanging over us. I would like once again to express my deep gratitude to my esteemed colleague, Igor Danilov. It is thanks to his tireless work and scientific foresight that 20 years ago we first identified the key threats associated with the Siberian magma plume and the possible ways to overcome them. His research and analysis anticipated this danger and have since been validated by subsequent events. Moreover, Mr. Danilov made an invaluable contribution to the development of practical solutions grounded in the principles of new physics, technologies and approaches that have now proven effective in preserving life on Earth, preventing impending catastrophe, and laying a solid foundation for the future of all humanity. Please recall the equipment developed by a Latra scientist, which operated continuously for 10 years on the territory of Russia. It was this very system that not only restrained the power and frequency of natural disasters across a vast area of the Earth, a fact already confirmed by objective data reflected in the graphs you've seen, but also helped prevent a potential eruption of the Siberian magma plume, an event that could have had catastrophic consequences for all of humanity. It was this same technology that held back global seismic activity. The fact that today we are most frequently registering earthquakes of magnitude 5.0 and are only now beginning to observe an increase in the frequency of magnitude 6.0 events, instead of an anticipated regular magnitude 7 and 8 earthquakes that should have already struck us. It is the direct result of that equipment and the efforts of our Alatra team. If you are still able to look into the mirror and see your own reflection, then that means this equipment really worked. It means it truly bought time for all of us and gave humanity a chance to move forward into the future. But what fills me with genuine anger and outrage is this. The precious time we gained through the operation of that equipment is being denied to us. We are not even allowed to use it for its intended purpose. We have only a limited window in which to act and to save lives and the planet, and that opportunity is being ruthlessly trampled upon and destroyed before we can even seize it. When Alatra was declared an undesirable organization in the Russian Federation in 2023, it wasn't just the operation of the experimental equipment that was halted. All monitoring of the Siberian magma plume by our scientists was also brought to an end. Now we can only infer its condition through indirect signs. No one else was tracking the situation, and as far as we can see, no one intends to. Not a single institution, government, or corporation is monitoring these processes at the necessary scale. And the most terrifying part is that they don't even begin to understand what we as humanity are truly dealing with. As for us, we have been completely cut off from monitoring the plume. We cannot even observe what is actually happening there, let alone assist in neutralizing the threat posed by the Siberian magma plume, an event that could at any moment claim all our lives. All of this is happening for one reason. While Alatra scientists were engaged in real substantive work, studying the climate, documenting anomalies, developing new scientific approaches, conveying crucial information about genuine threats to the global community, and searching for viable solutions, their reputation was deliberately distorted and defiled in the media by Dvorkin agents. Their sole purpose was to ensure that no one would dare to heed our findings, our data, or our appeals. And what has been the result? Because of the interest of a certain circle of Russian authorities, entrenched in their own financial agendas and brainwashed by Dvorkin's informational filth, we are now at serious risk of losing the narrow window of time available for degassing the Siberian plume. And that means losing the future of humanity itself. Tell me, do you really want your children to be robbed of their lives and their right to a tomorrow because of the lies of these shameless people? I don't think so. I am convinced that no one in their right mind would ever want that. Therefore, given the gravity and urgency of this moment, I have made an extremely important decision. We can no longer afford to lose time. It is a matter of survival that we regain access to data on the Siberian plume and place the situation once again under scientific observation. And so, I wish to make a serious, direct, and irreversible declaration. We have been silent for too long. We have placed our hopes in reason for too long. Now we are ready to issue a critical challenge. This is a challenge to the entire global scientific and civil community, including political leaders and responsible officials. It is a challenge in which we are prepared to demonstrate visibly and unequivocally what we are truly capable of doing. But we will do so only when the conditions required not just by us, but by all of humanity, by each and every one of you, are ensured so that life itself can be preserved. I am proposing two clear, unambiguous, and what I believe to be fair conditions. Conditions that will allow all of us and the entire planet to move forward. Firstly, the immediate restoration of full access for our scientific community to the monitoring of the Siberian plume. Secondly, the cessation of all forms of repression, discrediting and pressure against participants of the Allatra movement in every country, wherever they may be, including Russia and Ukraine. We are not asking for the impossible. We are demanding the restoration of our right to fulfill our duty to humanity. And now, here is what we are prepared to offer in return. Something that will compel the rewriting of every physics textbook. Something that will not only revolutionize our understanding of matter and energy, but will also provide the key to a new technological stage in the development of civilization. I am speaking of a unique scientific experiment, one whose significance extends far beyond the current boundaries of modern science. We are prepared to carry out openly, publicly, and with comprehensive scientific recording an unprecedented experiment in the history of humanity. The controlled formation of a material object, a salt crystal, sodium chloride, inside a sealed deep vacuum chamber. That is, in a vacuum without introducing any substance from the outside, using only the influence of precisely tuned electromagnetic fields. Yes, you heard correctly. We are, in essence, speaking about the emergence of matter from nothing, from a vacuum, where according to the current scientific model, nothing should be able to arise. No state, no institute, and no laboratory in the entire world is capable of this. But we, the scientists of Allatra, can do it, because we possess the necessary scientific experience and genuine expertise to carry out this task. To achieve this, we require two key components: the high-precision equipment specifically needed for this experiment, and 1 year of time. I am personally prepared to lead this experiment and assume full responsibility for its outcome. And I guarantee that within 1 year, we will present the result I have described and submit it for verification in any scientific format with complete transparency, reliability, and rigor. For those familiar with the fundamentals of physics, the scale of this experiment, demonstrating for the first time in history the emergence of matter from a vacuum, requires no explanation. Its global significance is self-evident. But for everyone else, Please allow me to clarify. The scientific and civilizational importance of this event surpasses even the first human flight into space or the moment humanity first learned to harness fire. Why? Because from a scientific standpoint, the result of this experiment would prove that a vacuum is not simply nothingness, but rather a medium in which the controlled formation of matter is possible through the influence of electromagnetic fields. This phenomenon opens new frontiers for matter synthesis, alternative energy sources, and fundamentally new technologies for the creation and control of objects at the quantum level. Moreover, the essence of this experiment offers a pathway to answering one of the most enduring questions in the history of science. How was our universe formed? And now I will say a few words for those familiar with the fundamentals of quantum physics, particularly quantum electrodynamics. We are speaking about the controlled creation of a salt crystal in a vacuum, 1/4 carat. This corresponds to approximately 1 quintillion atoms arranged in a crystalline lattice, an extraordinarily complex matrix structure at the nanoscale, the informational encoding of which represents a colossal volume of data. What we are dealing with here is an entirely new method of storing and transmitting information. And I am not referring to multi-level encoding or spintronics. I mean a fundamentally different approach. That said, I will note that recent advances in nanophotonics do play a certain role here, but that is the most I am able to disclose. However, I can state with complete confidence that we, the scientific team of ALLATRA, possess the complete body of knowledge required to make the following declaration as I look you directly in the eye. Exactly 1 year from the moment our conditions are met and the high precision equipment is provided, we will be ready to conduct and document this experiment publicly, demonstrating that matter can be synthesized from a vacuum. It is possible. And I draw your esteemed attention to this. The salt crystal we will form during the experiment, synthesized in a vacuum, will become the most unique and valuable substance in the history of humanity. Why, you ask? Because it will be the first object ever created by humans in a vacuum, in the traditional sense, from nothing. Yet this is only the beginning of what is possible. Following the successful formation of the crystal in a vacuum, I state with full responsibility that the next step will become entirely feasible in the foreseeable future, not some distant era. That step is the synthesis of biological structures in a vacuum. First, grains such as rice, and later living microscale organisms, eventually reaching the point of creating fairly complex life forms, such as the Drosophila fruit fly. Our civilization's current technological capabilities already make this achievable, provided there is the proper scientific approach, which the international research team of ALLATRA already possesses, and access to the necessary specialized infrastructure. We no longer have time for games, excuses, or inaction. That is why I am speaking to you today with unusual directness, urgency, and resolve. I hereby make an official appeal to the global scientific and political community. Accept this challenge. Grant freedom to ALLATRA. Restore access to monitoring the Siberian magma plume. Provide the necessary equipment. And exactly 1 year from the moment these conditions are fulfilled, we will demonstrate something that will propel global science forward, not by a mere step, but by millions of miles in an instant. Moreover, this will not merely be a technological breakthrough. It will instead mark a real opportunity to reconsider the very concept of space and time, and perhaps initiate the first conscious interaction with their fundamental structure and the ability to govern it. Notwithstanding, now I would like to delve deeper into one of the most fundamental and complex problems of modern physics: the nature of space and time. To grasp the essence of these concepts, I invite you to participate in a meaningful thought experiment. But before we proceed directly to it, esteemed colleagues, allow me to first pose several key initial questions. Questions through which I ask you to view the course of this experiment. The first question: what do you think time is? Is time an objective element of physical reality, existing independently of the observer, or is it a derivative, emerging as a result of change? Does time have direction? And if so, what kind? Linear, cyclical, spiral, or one that defies geometric description? Personally, I tend to view the direction of time as more spiral than linear. However, the question remains open. What, in your opinion, does the arrow of time look like? And why? Your second question is this: are time and space homogeneous in their physical nature, and are they always interconnected? Esteemed colleagues, I ask you to consider the following thought experiments while keeping these fundamental questions in mind. So let us proceed directly to the thought experiment, which under certain conditions in the foreseeable future may actually be implemented in physical reality. But for now, I invite you to merely engage your imagination and analytical thinking to mentally reconstruct as accurately as possible the key conditions and mechanisms of the proposed thought experiment. Let us imagine that we have a laboratory. In this laboratory, there is a special device capable of teleporting objects and moving them backward in time, that is, into the past. This movement occurs instantly at the moment a single button is pressed: send. Inside the laboratory, in a special chamber, there is a living biological object, an ordinary fruit fly. The experimenter decides to send this fly into the past, for example, 10 seconds back. For the sake of clarity in this thought experiment, let us imagine time as an arrow, the classical model in which time moves from the past to the future along a straight line. This simplification will help us clearly define the conditions of the experiment, although in reality the nature of time is far more complex. On the time arrow, we take a reference point. Let's call it T0. The zero moment, which is the starting point of the experiment. The fly located at this point is given the symbolic designation V. The next point on the time segment is T0 plus 10 seconds. This is the moment in time when the experimenter decides to send the fly back into the past, to the zero moment, T0. The fly that is sent into the past is given the designation V1. V1 is an object that is, in fact, never seen by the observer, because it is what teleports from the future into the past, or into the present if we speak from the observer's position at the moment T0. Sending an object back in time can have several possible scenarios, depending on where exactly it returns and how. Let's examine each scenario. So, the first scenario. Starting from point T0, the fly moves along the time arrow into the future. At the moment T0 plus 10, the experimenter presses the send button, and the fly is sent back into the past, to moment T0, that is 10 seconds earlier. This scenario assumes that it returns to precisely the same point in space where the original fly V was located. We'll give the designation V2 to the fly that was transported into the past. Thus, as a result of this first scenario, teleportation 10 seconds into the past, fly V2 ends up at precisely the exact coordinates as fly V at time point T0. Naturally, in order to send it to the same location, the experimenters had previously carried out extensive and precise calculations, fully understanding that during those 10 seconds, the time is rewound. The point in space where fly V was located in the past has now shifted due to the Earth's rotation on its axis, its orbital motion around the Sun, the movement of the entire solar system within the galaxy, and the galaxy's motion relative to the cosmic microwave background. Therefore, taking all these factors into account, the necessary adjustments were made, and the fly was sent into the past to the exact physical point in space and time that it occupied 10 seconds earlier. And here I have the first question for you. What will happen when fly V2 ends up in the exact same point in space occupied by fly V? What actually occurs when two objects with identical quantum configurations occupy the same point in space-time? Will the flies merge into one? Will there be two of them? Or might they annihilate each other? Or explode? And what would happen to reality in that case? And now the second question. After the fly has been sent into the past to exactly the same spatial location, what will the experimenters observe in their present at the notional point t plus 11 seconds, that is, 1 second after the teleportation? Will the fly that was sent into the past still be present at point t plus 11, or will it be gone? And most importantly, how will such a displacement affect the reality of the present? According to the classical concept of linear time, if we assume that only one fly remains in the past, the one that arrived from the future, then the situation can be described as a time loop. In this scenario, the fly from the future moves back in time to the moment of T0, then once again moves forward along the time arrow, reaches moment T0 plus 10 seconds, and from that point, it is sent back into the past once more. This cycle repeats endlessly. It ends up in the past again, goes through the same events, and is sent back once more. Thus, a closed cause and effect chain arises, in which every event is both the result of the previous one and the cause of the next. This is a time loop. An object becomes stuck in a fragment of space-time, where its trajectory repeats over and over forever. But here arises a third question. Is it even possible for such a time loop to form if the object returns to precisely the same point in spacetime that it previously occupied? After all, if at point T0, both versions, the original fly V and the one arriving from the future, V2, undergo annihilation, then how could the fly have been sent from point T0 plus 10 if, by that moment, it had already ceased to exist? Would a time loop still form in that case, if its cause had vanished before the act of sending ever occurred? If annihilation does not occur, and instead we observe a quantum merging of flies V and V2, in which the object undergoes a structural change, even if minor, then at the moment T0 plus 10, a different entity will arrive, no longer identical to the one that appeared at the beginning of the loop. Thus, the the time loop loses its identity, and with each cycle, a potential mutation of the fly takes place. Can a time loop still be formed in this case? In the third scenario, if both objects, V and V2, coexist at point T0 and do not interact physically, they neither annihilate nor merge, then at point T0 plus 10, two flies will appear. With each turn of the time loop, the number of instances will double, from 1 fly to 2, then 4, 8, 16, and so on, to infinity. This leads to exponential growth of matter within the time domain. And if space does not expand, then what will happen? How will this affect the space-time continuum of reality? And if an external observer, the experimenter, reaches point T0 plus 11 seconds, what exactly will he see as a result of such events? And will he even be able to exist there at all, given such a progression? I invite you to unravel this complex knot. Write down your answers. Now let us consider the second scenario of sending the fly into the past, one that raises even more questions. The second scenario involves sending the fly back in time with spatial displacement. This means we teleport the fly not to the same point, but shift its coordinates. At the moment, T0, next to the chamber containing the original fly, there is a second, empty chamber, say 1 meter away. This second chamber is intended, figuratively speaking, to receive the fly from the future. It is important to note that the second chamber does not participate in the sending process. It is merely a reception point, not the origin of teleportation. In this case, the calculations become exponentially more complex. Moving an object not only through time, but also through space, even by just 1 meter, requires accounting for additional parameters, inertial frames, gravitational and relativistic corrections, and more. According to the theory of relativity, space and time form a single unified fabric, and any shift in one dimension affects the other. Now imagine how much the energy requirements increase for performing such a displacement. That is, if we assume the principles of relativity theory are valid. In any case, let's play out the second scenario of sending the fly into the past with spatial displacement. Let us consider two possible outcomes within this scenario. So, the first version of the second scenario. On the time arrow at point T0, there is a chamber with fly V and a second, empty chamber. Fly V and the empty chamber move forward along the time arrow into the future. At the moment T0 plus 10, the experimenter presses the send button, and the fly, V1, is sent back 10 seconds into the past, and appears in the second chamber at the moment T0 as fly V2. Now at the zero moment, T0, there are two flies. The original fly, V, still unaware of its fate, and the second fly, V2, in the second chamber, returned from the future. Take note, for the observer at point T0, the fly from the future, V2, is already present in his reality before it has even been sent. And from the moment it appears at point T0, both flies and the observer move forward along the time arrow together. This means that the experimenter already sees the second fly 10 seconds before he presses the send button. Then when the moment T plus 10 seconds arrives, in this version of the scenario, our observer presses the send button. At that very moment, fly V1 disappears for him, having been sent into the past, while fly V2 continues to exist. Thus, only the V2 fly in the second chamber continues its existence from that point forward. But it is the same fly. Since fly V2 does not make a second journey into the past, then from the standpoint of general relativity, this temporal scenario does not form a closed time curve, but rather a one-time local loop in time, from which the object exits and continues its existence. Fly V reaches point T0 plus 10, and as V1 teleports into the past, where it becomes fly V2. When both fly V and V2 reach the moment T0 plus 10 seconds, V1 is sent into the past, and only fly V2 remains, continuing its existence further into the future along the time arrow. But now I want to ask you, how many flies are actually circulating in this local time loop? Some might say 1, others might say 2, but I say 3. Why? Try to answer that yourself. Moreover, I assert that within the framework of this thought experiment, the most accurate interpretation of the temporal trajectory is not a closed loop, but rather a path resembling two horizontal figure eights, two infinity symbols, or lemniscates, touching at point T0 plus 10, the moment when the fly is sent into the past. It is this very form that reflects the actual trajectory of the flies V, V1, and V2 in the course of this thought experiment. And I ask you to answer, why is the trajectory shaped this way? Now let us consider the second, more puzzling variation of the scenario involving sending the fly into the past with spatial displacement. In this version, the initial sequence of events remains the same. At time T0 plus 10 seconds, fly V1 is sent into the past, into the second chamber. As a result, at the moment T0, the observer already sees two flies, V, the original, and V2, the one that has arrived from the future. Both flies and the observer continue moving forward together along the time arrow. And then the moment T0 plus 10 arrives, the point at which, according to the original plan, the observer is supposed to press the send button and send fly V into the past. However, and this is the key condition of this variation of the thought experiment, the observer experimenter decides not to press the send button. Instead, the observer possesses free will, unaffected by the laws of time and space. His volition remains intact, upheld by the quantum laws of mechanics, regardless of how events have unfolded. This means that nothing prevents him from altering or even halting the course of the experiment. In this case, even though he has already seen the result of a future action, namely he has observed fly V2 for 10 seconds before its supposed teleportation into the past, the observer makes a conscious choice not to initiate the process of sending the original fly into the past. What follows from this? Fly V does not disappear because it was never sent, and fly V2 is already present in the present moment, regardless of whether the launch occurred. So now, at the moment T0 plus 10, on the same timeline, two identical flies exist simultaneously, V and V2. And now, the questions for you, my dear colleagues. What happens next if both of these flies pass point T plus 10 and continue their existence? Will they continue? And what in that case will happen to reality? And now I will ask you the second and perhaps the central question. Where did the second fly, V2, come from? If the act of sending it never actually occurred, yet it is standing before the observer. From the standpoint of classical physics and the principle of causality, this is impossible. An event cannot precede its cause. This scenario creates a temporal paradox, as it implies that an object appeared in the past without ever having been sent from the future. However, as I have already noted, the experimenter's freedom of choice is neither determined nor constrained by the laws of classical physics or the patterns of space-time. And that means that in any version of events, he still retains the option to cancel the sending. He may choose not to press the send button and thereby break the chain of causality. In that case, both flies, V and V2, will remain in their present reality. And now, two key questions subsequently arise. Where did the original fly, V1, go? The one that was supposed to be teleported. And how, in that case, did fly V2 come into existence if the act of sending it never actually took place? Yes, esteemed colleagues, I understand that I've posed quite a number of questions regarding each of the proposed scenarios in this thought experiment. I hope you've kept in mind the original setup, the very setting where it all began. As you'll recall, I invited you to examine all of these thought experiments through the lens of a key question. What is the true nature of time and space? I urge you to reflect seriously on each of the questions I've raised and to send me your answers. You can use the official communication channel by writing to me via email or leaving a comment on the online platform where you've been watching this video. The most important thing is to engage thoughtfully with the proposed thought experiments and questions. Try to approach them logically. Formulate your conclusions with clear reasoning and express your answers plainly. I understand that some of you, while trying to analyze the conditions of this experiment and realizing the scale and complexity of information that must be accounted for, may say that such an experiment is impossible to conduct in physical reality. But I tell you, it is absolutely possible, and we can repeat it publicly. And now, I would like to return once more to the proposal I have put forward today. Ultimately, it is the central reason for this address. The more simple yet most consequential experiment we can conduct for the future of humanity, the controlled formation of a salt crystal in a vacuum chamber without introducing any external substance, is not merely a scientific demonstration. It is a turning point in modern physics. This experiment has the power to disrupt established assumptions about vacuum and electromagnetism. It represents a step forward, a fundamental rethinking of matter, energy, the structure of space, and the origin of the universe. And all we ask in return for this breakthrough is this: end the barbaric persecution of scientists, end the repression of Allatra participants around the world, especially in Russia and Ukraine. Lift the restrictions. Grant access to observation and oversight of the Siberian magma plume. Allow us to continue our work on the primary method of neutralizing it, active degassing, or at the very least, on exploring possible alternatives, so that we may have even the slightest chance to save your lives and the lives of your families. From my perspective, of course, the most direct and effective way to eliminate the plume threat is through controlled degassing. This is a tested and verified technology. I have previously explained its principle, comparable to releasing excess pressure from a balloon. Degassing remains the most practical and effective tool humanity currently possesses in the fight for its future and survival. But even if you are not ready to adopt this solution, then at the very least, allow experimental work to continue within the Siberian plume region on other potential methods to save your lives and the lives of humankind. Set us free. Provide the necessary equipment. And exactly 1 year from now, we will show you something that will alter the trajectory of civilization itself. These are not grandiose words. This is a direct outcome of physics. If it is allowed to function as it should, and the natural result of years of research conducted by the interdisciplinary team of scientists at ALLATRA. There is, however, one more aspect of this experiment that I must address. Yes, if provided with the necessary equipment, we are capable of carrying it out entirely on our own. However, doing so would mean that, for the duration of 1 year preparation period, our leading experts and physicists would have to be diverted from their current work, namely the development of alternative solutions to the escalating geodynamic threat, which may hold the key to preserving life on our planet. Therefore, under ideal conditions for preparing this experiment and performing the necessary calculations, I will need physicists with a deep understanding of the fundamental laws of nature. Smart, thoughtful, unconfined by convention, scientists with active, creative minds, at least 1,500 and ideally 2,000 such specialists. This is not a luxury. It is a necessity, dictated by the scale and complexity of the task at hand. As I've said, if necessary, we can carry out all the preparatory work within a year on our own. But that would force us to make a choice. Either we devote our limited time, resources to saving lives or to proving what we already know. Framing the issue this way unquestionably increases the risk for all of humanity, but there is no time left for games. If securing the lifting of pressure on ALLATRA and gaining territorial access and experimental work with the plume requires sacrificing an entire year just to convince you, ladies and gentlemen, then I am willing to make that sacrifice. Because the alternative would be far worse for you. If we are denied access to the plume until the moment it activates, it will then be too late for proof, too late for anything at all. For the public, allow me to also remind you that the ALLATRA scientific team is currently engaged not only in addressing geodynamic and climate-related threats, including the problem of the Siberian magma plume, but is also dedicating focused attention to a second critical and deadly threat, nanoplastics. We are conducting deep, comprehensive research into their properties and actively working to identify effective methods for neutralizing their destructive impact on the biosphere and human health. While the plume is a threat to the future, nanoplastic is a threat to the present, one that has already infiltrated the entire biosphere and all of humanity, including each of you. It is a true pandemic, the full scale of which remains largely unknown and which, for now, is still absent from major international platforms, despite the fact that nanoplastic has already become the #1 killer. Nanoplastic penetrates everywhere, into brain cells, neurons, blood, organs, the placenta, and even embryos. It is already inside children still in the womb. These are facts documented in dozens of scientific studies, many of which emerge in part thanks to the momentum created by our research and warnings. Just look at these images. They show the brain of a bee, with illuminated areas highlighting the presence of nanoplastic. It is killing the bee from within, inducing a form of dementia, causing it to forget where its hive is, what its role is, and where or why it was even flying. Now tell me, have you noticed similar symptoms in yourself? Forgetting why you walked into a room, mixing up words, struggling to recall someone's name, sudden unexplained headaches. These may seem like minor lapses, but the increasing frequency of such symptoms is a warning sign. Nanoplastic in your brain tissue is already impairing your cognitive abilities. And by the way, in your brain, it looks exactly like it does in the bee's brain in that image, bringing with it the same destructive consequences. Are you surprised by the sharp rise in reproductive disorders among humans? By the increase in fetal mutations? The root cause behind all of this is the same. The reproductive function of Homo sapiens is rapidly degrading, driven directly by the influence of nanoplastics. Children born today face a high likelihood of being unable to have offspring in the future. And even if they can, the health of that next generation will be seriously jeopardized. At this point, we are no longer speaking about health in the traditional sense. We are speaking about survival. Nanoplastic induces mutations that accumulate and are inherited. These are irreversible processes already spreading throughout the entire biosphere. I addressed this issue in my previous statement, and the LATRA volunteers have also released several documentary films vividly illustrating the terrifying scale of the nanoplastic crisis. Today, only we, and I emphasize only we at LATRA, are raising our voices in both the scientific and public arenas about the true danger of nanoplastics and the biological survival crisis they are triggering. We do not yet have a definitive solution to this problem. However, we do possess the necessary understanding, a solid scientific foundation, and an innovative research approach. At present, we are investigating a method to reduce nanoplastics' capacity to accumulate excess electrostatic charge. This is the first step. The next is developing safe methods for removing nanoplastics from living organisms and ecosystems. We hope that we will have both the time and the means to carry this work forward, alongside solving another urgent problem, one that only we are currently addressing through a full-scale integrated effort, the problem of the Siberian magma plume, a critical fault line threatening our fragile existence, one that must not under any circumstances be left unmonitored. And now, in conclusion, allow me to address the world's political leadership, the circle of those who bear responsibility for the future of our planet. I want you to finally recognize that there are two inescapable threats to all forms of life on Earth today, including your own, the Siberian magma plume and nanoplastics. The resolution of these two most complex challenges will determine the survival of not only us, but also you. To the international public, I make this appeal. Please share this information as widely as possible so that it reaches those individuals I have just mentioned, those in positions of power who now hold the decision in their hands whether we live or die. In light of everything I've just laid out, I hope you now understand why we at LATRA are sounding the alarm, even as we are beaten down and silenced. Any other organization would have given up long ago, but we are still trying to break through to your awareness, to your understanding, because we believe with absolute conviction that life is worth fighting for.